dies where they are grieving that person's death and trying to figure out some things about their own self. And on that grief journey, most practitioners, mental health would say there are grief goals now that people need to attend to. And we'd like to just help you understand how funeral events are really the first step on that grief journey. So it's very helpful for people to go through the funeral events, because then they can move through the grief journey already being launched. So we're going to talk about each one of the 5 goals and then help you understand how they're active. There's things for people to do. They're interactive, but they're not sequential goals.
The first goal of the grief journey that we want to talk about is simply to help the people accept the reality that the death has occurred. Now, obviously, they can see that a person has died, but emotionally it takes a while to do that. And the funeral events that we've been talking about are extremely important to begin to desensitize people to the reality of that death, so they can begin to accept the reality of what has happened. They're able, hopefully, to spend more time with the person after the death. I hope they're actually encouraged to use words like dead and died rather than passed away or gone to another place. And as we have mentioned in so many cases, these funeral events give them an opportunity to say goodbye to the body and to begin to digest the reality that this death has occurred, so they can emotionally accept what's happened to their loved one.
Another goal, not necessarily sequential, but is to help the bereaved express all the emotions that are associated with the death. And obviously, funeral events play a very important part in that, because all of those events help to elicit people's feelings. We're all created as human beings with both thoughts and feelings, and if we don't express those, if we stuff those inside, they come out in some really negative ways, either emotionally or physically at some point in our lives. So to get them out as the funeral events are occurring, either getting triggered by music or by eulogy or by favorite readings of somebody or a message given, is just a really good help in getting people in a safe environment to be able to express their emotions and get the support that they need.
Another goal of the grief journey is to store memories and to move the relationship with this deceased person into the past. There are ways to store memories what the funeral events provide, in terms of seeing the pictures, hearing the stories that people will tell either during the luncheon or during the visitation, hear the eulogies that are going to be offered perhaps in the service itself. Many funeral directors will take pictures or perhaps make a DVD or a tape of the service itself, and all of these ways help reinforce the fact that the person who now died is no longer here in the present tense. So we must begin to refer to that person in the past tense, and we can continue to point to the values and to the interests and accomplishments of that person. But this goal really is to underscore the fact that that person's life ended at a certain point, whereas the bereaved's life continues on. Their lifeline extends beyond the point of that person's death. And the goal then is to accept the reality that that person is now past, and the bereaved person is now moving on into the future.
Bob was just referring to one of the goals is to move the person who died into one's past if you're bereaved. And now, once that happens, people are starting to look at themselves apart from the deceased loved one. They have to really separate themselves to form their identity. Who am I now without this person in my life? My life's not going to be the same. How am I going to live life? And one of the ways that they do that is to really look at what that deceased person contributed to their life, how that person enhanced their life, and maybe choose to emulate some of those values and beliefs or interests, or assimilate them to fit them in and to say, I'm doing this in a healthier way or different way because of my relationship with a person who died. There are some tangible ways that funeral events help separate the deceased from the bereaved, and that is by use of the marker and headstone, which definitely says my loved one is now here, not coming home with me. Also, the urn, and we would just want to say one word about that, that at first it's very comforting to people to have the cremains with them sometimes rather than placing them in another site. But psychologically, we'd recommend that eventually they move those to a site. It really makes good sense as well because it gives universally a place for all the family and friends and people who cared about the deceased to go visit.
One final goal of the grief process is to help the person, the bereaved person, establish a new normal for their life, to reinvest in life as fully as possible. Susan was just saying that one of the goals is to be able to separate their identity from the deceased, and now, once that is separated, one needs to really invest in life and create a new normal. Obviously, life will not be the same without the deceased person in their life, but it doesn't mean that they have to be grieving forever. And we really hold out the hope for people that they can reinvest in life in a way that that grief no longer identifies them on a day-to-day or month-to-month basis. And so obviously while one is going through a funeral, they probably aren't feeling like this is going to go away very quickly. But I think we can really hold out hope for them to say, as you work through your grief, you can get to the point where life can be rich and fulfilling once again, that you can get through your grief, and that grief is not a dead-end process.
So Bob, after listening to our presentation, do you think the people that have been listening with us are going to be able to identify what the bottom lines that we've been trying to communicate to them are?
Well, I hope so, because with the goals of grief, we really want to underscore the fact that these goals of grief are really met, at least initially, in the funeral events that we've been talking about, that it helps accept the reality of the death and moves people into memories and this sort of thing. But we also want to underscore the fact that the use of a professional funeral director really supports this, because they are the ones who have, as we said earlier, the expertise in this, and they can help design a funeral that really is individualized to their needs and yet really meets these goals of grief in terms of beginning their grief journey.
Right. You know, and that is so important that we look to people who do have expertise, who do this day in and day out, and really know educationally what's going to be helpful, or at least what people need to consider. And then they can customize it to fit their individual family needs as well. You know, it's been said that our heads know, but our hearts need a whole lot more convincing. And do not underestimate the value of ritual in that process. It has been known to really help, again, in a new way, present reality of that loved one's death by going through each one of these funeral events or some combination of those, so that people really get launched on their grief journey in a healthy way. And we wish that for you as you have the opportunity when somebody dies to really figure out what you're going to do for the funeral events, and also to plan for your own death. We wish you the best. Thank you for listening.